There is a number hiding inside you right now. A tiny concentration of sugar dissolved in your blood, measured in milligrams per deciliter. You never see it, you never feel it change, but every single meal, every hour of sleep, every moment of exertion, your body is quietly managing this number with extraordinary precision. Sugar. We dissolve it in our coffee, stir it into our recipes, and rarely think twice about what happens once it enters the bloodstream. But at the molecular level, glucose is fuel. It is the body's preferred source of energy. And keeping it in balance is one of the oldest biological tasks any living organism performs. Type 2 diabetes. It affects more than 500 million people worldwide, and that number is still climbing. It is not a single event. It is not a switch that flips. It is a slow unraveling of one of the most elegant control systems the human body has ever built.
The story begins in the gut. When you eat, carbohydrates are broken apart into their simplest form, glucose, which passes through the wall of the small intestine and enters the bloodstream. This triggers a chain of events that has been running flawlessly in healthy bodies for hundreds of thousands of years.
Once in the blood, glucose molecules flow through every vessel in the body. But they cannot simply walk into a cell on their own. They need an invitation. They need a key. And that key has a name.
Deep inside the pancreas, tucked into tiny clusters called the islets of Langerhans, beta cells are constantly monitoring blood sugar levels. The moment glucose rises after a meal, these cells respond by releasing insulin, a hormone that will determine where all that energy goes next.
Insulin binds to receptors on the surface of your cells and triggers a cascade. Transporter proteins called GLUT4 rise to the membrane and open like gates. Glucose streams inside. The cell gets its fuel. Blood sugar drops back toward normal. It is a beautifully precise mechanism, and when it works, you never notice it happening. The liver and the muscles work in concert during this process. Muscles absorb the largest share of glucose after a meal. The liver, meanwhile, receives insulin's signal to stop producing its own glucose supply. Together, they bring the system back into balance within roughly 2 hours. Every single time. But what happens when the cells stop listening? When insulin arrives at the receptor, binds just as it always has, and the door simply does not open the way it should. This is where the story of type 2 diabetes truly begins. Not with sugar, with silence. One of the most powerful drivers of insulin resistance is visceral fat, the fat stored deep inside the abdomen, wrapping around organs you cannot see from the outside. Unlike the fat beneath your skin, visceral fat is metabolically aggressive. It releases inflammatory signals and free fatty acids that actively interfere with insulin's ability to do its job. Skeletal muscle is the single largest destination for glucose in the entire body. When muscle cells become resistant to insulin, it is like closing the biggest door in the house. Glucose pools in the bloodstream with nowhere efficient to go. The pressure builds. The pancreas does not surrender easily. Faced with rising blood sugar, beta cells begin producing far more insulin than normal, sometimes 2 or 3 times the usual amount. This compensatory effort can maintain near normal glucose levels for months, even years. But it comes at a cost the body cannot sustain forever. Over time, the relentless demand wears beta cells down. Chronic exposure to high glucose and fatty acids becomes toxic to the very cells trying to compensate. Amyloid deposits begin to form between them, like frost spreading across glass. One by one, beta cells go dark. By the time diabetes is diagnosed, roughly half of them may already be gone. The symptoms creep in quietly. Persistent thirst that no amount of water seems to satisfy, fatigue that settles in without explanation, blurred vision, wounds that take longer to heal than they should. Each one a downstream consequence of glucose building up where it does not belong.
Sometimes the body leaves a visible clue before the blood tests ever confirm anything. Darkened, velvety patches of skin, often on the back of the neck or under the arms. This is acanthosis nigricans, and it is driven not by glucose, but by the excess insulin the body is producing to compensate. A warning sign hiding in plain sight. So, where does it all begin? Look at the world we have built. Cities designed around cars rather than movement. Food systems optimized for convenience and cost rather than nutrition. The environment itself has become a silent partner in this metabolic shift. Genetics loads the gun. Having one parent with type 2 diabetes can double or triple the lifetime risk. Having both parents raises it further still. Twin studies show concordance rates above 70% in identical twins. The blueprint matters, but the blueprint alone does not explain what has happened over the last 50 years. Human DNA has not changed meaningfully in a few decades. What has changed is everything around it. Genes that helped our ancestors survive famine by storing energy efficiently now operate in an environment of constant caloric surplus. The same code running in a completely different world. Here is a detail that surprises many people. Not all body fat carries the same metabolic risk. The fat just beneath the skin is relatively harmless, but visceral fat, the kind packed around internal organs, behaves like an endocrine disruptor. It pours inflammatory molecules directly into the liver's blood supply and drives insulin resistance from the inside out. Not all fat is equal, and neither is body mass index. Some people develop severe insulin resistance at weights that would be considered normal by standard charts. Others carry significant excess weight without crossing the metabolic threshold for years. The geography of fat matters more than the number on the scale. Stillness itself is a risk factor. Prolonged sitting, independent of whether someone exercises at other times, is associated with impaired glucose metabolism. But when muscles contract, something remarkable happens. They pull glucose in through pathways that bypass insulin entirely. Movement is quite literally its own kind of medicine. Muscle takes glucose in during exercise without waiting for insulin's permission. GLUT4 transporters activate through mechanical contraction alone. This is why regular physical activity improves glucose control even when insulin resistance is already present. The muscle still has a back door. It just needs a reason to open it. Sugar-sweetened beverages deserve special attention. Liquid calories bypass the body's satiety signals. A single large drink can deliver a massive glucose load in minutes, triggering a sharp insulin spike. Over years, these repeated surges accelerate the very cycle of resistance and overproduction that drives the disease forward.
Gestational diabetes, high blood sugar during pregnancy that resolves after delivery, is one of the strongest predictors of future type 2 diabetes. It reveals that the metabolic system was already under strain, even if the numbers looked normal before conception. An early warning that deserves attention long after the baby is born.
This disease does not arrive overnight. The decline in beta cell function unfolds across a decade or more. Insulin resistance builds gradually. Blood sugar drifts upwards slowly through prediabetes and beyond. By the time a diagnosis is made, the metabolic machinery has often been struggling for years. The damage accumulates inside blood vessels. Chronically elevated glucose triggers the formation of advanced glycation end products, sticky molecular complexes that coat the inner walls of arteries and capillaries like rust building inside a pipe. The process is slow, silent, and relentless. The smallest vessels suffer first. In the retina, tiny hemorrhages appear as capillaries weaken. In the kidneys, the delicate filtering units begin to scar. In the peripheral nerves, The blood supply that keeps them alive deteriorates, producing numbness, tingling, and pain that typically begins in the feet and works its way upward. Eyes, kidneys, nerves. 3 targets, 1 mechanism.
But the greatest threat is macrovascular. Coronary arteries narrow with atherosclerotic plaque. The risk of heart attack and stroke climbs significantly. Cardiovascular disease remains the leading cause of death among people living with type 2 diabetes. The combination of high glucose, abnormal lipids, elevated blood pressure, and chronic inflammation creates a uniquely hostile environment for arterial walls.
Beyond the clinical numbers, there is a human weight to this condition that rarely makes it into textbooks. Disrupted sleep, the constant mental arithmetic of managing every meal, the frustration of doing everything right and still watching the numbers climb. Diabetes distress is real, and it compounds the metabolic burden with an emotional one. Pill bottles, test strips, a glucose meter, a carefully portioned meal. This is what daily management looks like. Not a dramatic event, but a continuous negotiation with a condition that never takes a day off. Every meal, every morning, every evening. The weight of daily life with type 2 diabetes is quiet but constant. For a long time, type 2 diabetes was understood as a disease of 2 organs, the pancreas and the muscle. But modern research has revealed something far more complex. At least 8 organ systems are involved, each feeding into the others through a web of hormonal signals, metabolic pathways, and feedback loops that make this condition remarkably difficult to untangle. The liver is a central player. In a healthy person, insulin tells the liver to stop producing glucose after a meal. But when the liver becomes insulin resistant, it ignores that signal. It keeps pouring glucose into the bloodstream even when levels are already high. This inappropriate hepatic output is a major reason fasting blood sugar rises in type 2 diabetes. To make matters worse, fat accumulates inside the liver itself. Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is extremely common in people with type 2 diabetes, and the relationship is bidirectional. Fat in the liver disrupts insulin signaling and promotes inflammation, which drives more resistance, which promotes more fat storage. A self-reinforcing loop that is very difficult to break. Fat is not just storage. Visceral fat cells are endocrine factories, releasing dozens of signaling molecules into the bloodstream. When these cells expand beyond their capacity, some outgrow their blood supply. They become oxygen-starved. Immune cells rush in. And what follows is a state of chronic, low-grade inflammation, not from any infection, but from metabolic overload. 2 molecules tell this story clearly. Adiponectin, which normally improves insulin sensitivity, fades as visceral fat expands. Leptin, the satiety hormone, floods the bloodstream in larger and larger quantities, but the brain stops responding to it. The signals meant to protect the body are either disappearing or being ignored. The gut plays a role most people never expect. When food reaches the small intestine, specialized cells release a hormone called GLP-1. This hormone travels to the pancreas, where it amplifies insulin release. It also slows digestion, reduces appetite, and quiets glucagon. It is one of the body's most elegant regulatory tools. But in type 2 diabetes, this incretin system weakens. GLP-1 secretion may decline. Beta cells become less responsive to its signal. Gastric emptying speeds up. Hunger intensifies. Glucagon, which should be suppressed, remains elevated and drives even more glucose out of the liver. The gut-pancreas partnership, once seamless, begins to fall apart. Here is one of the most paradoxical details in the entire disease. The kidneys filter roughly 180 grams of glucose from the blood every day and normally reabsorb all of it. In type 2 diabetes, the kidneys actually become more efficient at reclaiming glucose, raising the threshold before any spills into the urine. The kidneys are essentially working against the patient, conserving sugar the body already has in excess.
The brain is involved too. The hypothalamus integrates signals from insulin, leptin, and circulating nutrients to regulate appetite and energy balance. When central insulin resistance develops in these neurons, appetite circuits stay active when they should quiet down. This neurobiological dimension challenges simplistic narratives about willpower and dietary discipline.
Not all diabetes is the same. Type 1 results from autoimmune destruction of beta cells, typically appearing in childhood with rapid onset symptoms and absolute insulin deficiency. Type 2 involves insulin resistance with gradual beta cell decline, usually in the context of excess weight and family history. The mechanisms are fundamentally different, and so is the management. But the boundary between types is not always sharp. A condition called LADA, sometimes described as type 1.5, appears in adults with features that initially look like type 2, but autoimmune markers are present. It progresses more slowly than classic type 1, but eventually requires insulin. Classification matters because getting it wrong means the wrong treatment. Diagnosis begins with a blood draw, a simple, quiet act that can change the course of a life. The deep red filling a glass tube holds answers the body has been keeping to itself, sometimes for years. 3 numbers define the diagnostic landscape: a fasting glucose at or above 126 milligrams per deciliter, a hemoglobin A1C at or above 6.5%, or a 2-hour glucose tolerance result at or above 200. Any one of these, confirmed on repeat testing, is enough. There's a space between normal and diabetic where intervention can make a profound difference: prediabetes. Clinical trials have shown that modest lifestyle changes, losing just 5 to 7% of body weight and maintaining regular physical activity, can reduce the progression to full diabetes by roughly 50 to 60%. That is a remarkable window of opportunity. Early detection changes everything. Because type 2 diabetes can be present for years before any symptoms appear, screening in at-risk populations catches the disease during the period when its trajectory can still be altered. A conversation with a physician, a routine blood test, can be the turning point between complication and prevention. Management begins not with a prescription, but with a foundation: movement, a pair of shoes laced at dawn, the decision to walk, to stretch, to build strength. Exercise activates glucose uptake through pathways that work independently of insulin, making it one of the most powerful tools available at every stage of the disease. Nutrition is the other pillar. Not a single prescribed diet, but a sustainable pattern. Whole grains, vegetables, legumes, healthy fats, prepared with care and intention. Even modest weight loss, 5 to 7% of starting weight, has been shown to meaningfully improve insulin sensitivity, blood pressure, and lipid profiles. Sustainability is the key, not intensity. On one side, muscles pulling in glucose through exercise. On the other, visceral fat slowly shrinking as inflammation cools. These are not abstract improvements. They are measurable, visible shifts in metabolic health that lifestyle changes can produce, sometimes within weeks of consistent effort. When lifestyle alone is not enough, pharmacology steps in. Metformin, the most widely prescribed glucose-lowering medication in the world. A single white tablet that has been the cornerstone of type 2 diabetes management for decades. Metformin works primarily in the liver, quieting the overproduction of glucose that drives fasting levels up. It improves insulin sensitivity without causing dangerous drops in blood sugar. It is inexpensive, well-tolerated, and has a cardiovascular safety profile that newer, more expensive agents still measure themselves against. But the treatment landscape has expanded dramatically. Oral tablets, injectable pens, combination therapies, each working through a different mechanism, each suited to a different metabolic profile. The era of one-size-fits-all glucose management is over. GLP-1 receptor agonists may be the most significant pharmaceutical development in diabetes care in a generation. They mimic the gut hormone that amplifies insulin release, slow gastric emptying, and reduce appetite through direct action on the brain. Several have demonstrated not only glucose lowering, but measurable cardiovascular and kidney protective benefits. Beyond glucose, indeed. SGLT2 inhibitors take an entirely different approach. They block glucose reabsorption in the kidney, allowing excess sugar to pass out through the urine. But the surprise was what came next. Large clinical trials revealed striking reductions in heart failure hospitalization and kidney disease progression, benefits that extend even to patients without diabetes. Technology has transformed daily monitoring. A small sensor placed under the skin of the upper arm reads glucose levels every few minutes and sends the data to a smartphone in real time. Continuous glucose monitoring has turned an invisible number into a visible curve, giving people immediate feedback on how food, activity, stress, and sleep affect their blood sugar. Hemoglobin A1C remains the North Star of long-term management, a single value that captures the average glucose exposure over 2 to 3 months. Watching that curve bend downward from the red zone into amber and toward green is one of the most tangible markers of progress. Measurable change, month by month. Management extends far beyond glucose. Regular eye examinations screen for retinopathy before vision is threatened. Blood pressure control slows vascular damage. Lipid management with statins reduces cardiovascular risk. Foot examinations catch neuropathy early. Comprehensive care means watching the whole body, not just one number. More than 500 million adults worldwide are living with diabetes today, the vast majority with type 2. That number is projected to approach 780 million by 2045. Every region, every continent, every income level is affected. The scale of this condition is difficult to fully comprehend. What makes type 2 diabetes so scientifically fascinating is that it is not a disease of one organ. It is a disease of systems. The pancreas, the liver, the muscles, the fat, the gut, the kidneys, the brain, the vasculature, all connected through feedback loops that researchers are still working to fully map. In studying this single condition, medicine confronts the architecture of metabolic health itself. Type 2 diabetes is, at its core, a disease defined by time. It develops over years of slowly increasing resistance and declining beta cell function. Its complications accumulate incrementally. But time also creates opportunity. Prediabetes can be intercepted. Early diabetes can be managed effectively. Complications can be delayed or prevented. At every stage, the trajectory can be changed.
And that may be the most important thing to understand. This is not a story without agency. It is a story where knowledge, attention, and sustained effort can genuinely alter the outcome. If there is a condition, a symptom, or a topic you want explored next in this kind of depth, leave it in the comments below. And if this helped you understand something new, consider subscribing so you do not miss what comes next.